Hi, everyone. My name is Jeremy Goldberg, and I'm a product designer at Facebook. And before I get started, I actually just want to thank Drew and Matt for this conference. This is a really special conference for me, and it's my third ValioCon. And the first year that I came here, I was living in Arizona, and I didn't know a lot of people in this industry. And I got out of my comfort zone and came to this conference, and I've made a lot of really special friends here, and owe a lot of the opportunities I've had in my career to this conference. And so I just encourage all of you to make the best of these 4 days, these 4 special days, learn from each other, get outside your comfort zone, talk, communicate, and you never know what opportunities might come for you. Cool. So I want to talk a bit more about communication. As I said, I'm a product designer at Facebook, and I work on Messenger. And over the last year and a half, I've been building experiences for businesses, for our platform, and for AI. And it's a really exciting space to be in. And our goal on the business and platform team in Messenger is to create delightful and meaningful experiences and relationships between people and business. And a lot of what we do in this space derives from the interactions and the communication that's already happening between people on Messenger. And what a lot of people don't know is that there's already a ton of organic communication happening between people and business. And over 1 billion messages are sent between people and business every month on our platform. And so over the last year and a half to 2 years, we've been learning and understanding and experimenting and building stuff so that we can start to empower developers and businesses with tools so that they can create their own experiences. And I've had the opportunity to work on a lot of really cool projects. And one that's very near and dear to my heart, and something that a small group of us created, is a product called M. And M is a personal assistant in Messenger. And it can help you complete almost any task. And you can do it simply by talking to M like you would with a person. And it's a really cool project, and you can get a restaurant reservation, you can buy a gift or plan your day. And what's unique about M's approach is that M is human-trained AI, meaning that there are real people, often on the other side of M, who are handling a lot of those tasks for you. And that helps us better understand intent and have this dialogue going. And that helps us train AI and train our AI models in new ways and train AI in a way that typically computers can't handle. And so I was having brunch with some of my friends, and I needed to renew my driver's license. And so I messaged M, and I said, hey, M, I need to renew my driver's license. Can you help me out? And I put my phone back in my pocket, and I had brunch with my friends, and I enjoyed myself. And when I was done, I got a message. I saw my phone. I had a notification from M, and M had booked me a reservation at the DMV. And I didn't have to do anything. And it was a really magical moment. So that's how M works and how powerful it can be. So I want to talk a bit about what it's like to be a designer in this space. And I want to talk about the tools that I use in my process. And today I'm not going to talk about traditional design tools. I'm not going to talk about pixels or prototyping things. I'm going to talk about a tool that I use and that I think all of you can use. And it's called framing. Not Framer, the prototyping tool, but framing. I imagine that everyone in this room at some point has felt misunderstood as a designer. And we spend a lot of time crafting solutions to increasingly complex problems. And it really sucks when our working partners or our clients don't understand or interpret our work the way that we intended. And it's frustrating when people don't understand what design is and what we do. And so framing is an instrument that you can use to better communicate, better tell your story, be it better communicating your work, your strategy, intention, emotion, or a point of view. And the goal of framing is to have a really high level of comprehension so that people understand exactly what you're trying to do. And you can apply framing to design critiques and when you're sharing your work, when you're pitching something. You can apply it to your product, to your narrative, and even your communication style. And if you get really good at framing, not only will you change the perception of what design does and is, but it will elevate your influence on your team and with your clients, and it will elevate your work. So at this point, framing might seem a little abstract. We'll get into it more. But it pertains to two things. It pertains to people and to product. And by better communicating, you're going to build better relationships with people on your team or your clients and build more trust. And that often leads to building better products. So the first step in having good framing and having better communication is having a really strong process. And we have a process that works really well for us at Facebook, and it's called Understand, Identify, Execute. And this is really all about understanding deeply the space that you're trying to solve problems for, identifying how you can be most impactful, and then executing really well on that. So let me give you a few examples. These are the types of questions that you can ask in an understand phase. You can ask, what is our vision? What problem or use case are we solving? Who's our audience? And you can go deep into all of these questions. And you can leverage data and research to help you do this and better understand. And you can leverage that to understand things like product market fit or existing user behaviors. And it's important to give yourself enough time in this understand phase and not just jump into your comfort zone and go into Sketch or Photoshop or whatever tool you typically like to go in and just start working on stuff. Give yourself the time to understand. So how does this relate back to framing? Well, if someone on your team or a client asks you, what's our use case, instead of just telling them what you think the use case is, you can frame it. And now that you have more understanding, you can say something along the lines of, well, given that our goal is this, we're noticing that there's a lot of traffic or stuff happening over here. And it's happening in these markets and with these people. And it's happening even though we haven't built any tools and there's a lot of friction, and we think that there's an opportunity to solve this problem. So that's an example of now how you can frame that instead of just showing a mock or giving an answer. And the next step when you start to do that and have that framing and that narrative is to start to identify how you can be most impactful. So you can figure out how to be most impactful. You can identify the levers and things you can pull so that you can better understand and better identify. And now when you're getting questions asked to you about things that pertain to this, like, okay, well, what are we going to build or how are we going to do it? You can start to say, well, we found that there's a lot of friction here in this step, and it's not leading to conversion or whatever your goals or metrics are. And we think that if we solve this, it's going to help us reach our goal better. And when you start to do that, then you can start to execute on the roadmap that you're going to build, the products that you're going to build, and how you're going to do it. And now, instead of just going in to a meeting or a pitch or with a client and showing them work, you have a story that you can tell and a narrative that you can tell that frames what you're really trying to do so they really understand and comprehend that. So I want to give a concrete example of this and how I've used framing in this process with M. And with M, it all starts with the question, why? Why did we build this? Why does it matter? So, as I said earlier, our goal on the business and platform team is to create meaningful relationships between people and business. And within that goal, we made two bets. we said, we want to create experiences where people have a relationship with a brand or business that they care about, and that often leads in Messenger to having a thread with that business. But we also said that sometimes you just want to get something done and you don't care how. And that's where M comes in, and that's where a personal assistant comes in. And it was important for us to also understand why this matters. And at a high level, it matters because in my DMV example, we can start to remove friction and mundane things from people's lives so that they can get back to what they care about, and the people they care about, and the things they care about. But it also matters because of what the interaction model in M affords. It's conversational. And having a conversational interaction gives us dialogue in the experience. And that dialogue often leads to really understanding the intent of what someone is trying to do. And that means like understanding why someone is trying to do something. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you want to go to New York to surprise your sister for her birthday. Typically, you might go to a search engine or an app to go and complete that task. And that's fine. Those things work pretty well. But those things are incredibly reactive, and they only understand the what and the how. They understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to get to New York. And they're going to try and help you in how you do that by getting on a flight with a certain airline. But they don't understand why. And M is different because it's conversational. And so that often affords a conversation that goes something like, hey, M, I want to surprise my sister for her birthday, and she lives in New York. Can you help me get a flight? And not only can M complete this task for you without you having to do almost any work, but M understands why you're going to New York. So M can start to suggest that maybe it can help you get restaurant reservations or see a great show or get you that Uber from the airport to your hotel. And what that translates to is M understanding why you're doing something. And this helps us train AI in a more personal way, and it helps us train AI in new ways. And it means that M is not only reactive, but it's contextual and proactive. And these are the three things that make up a good assistant, and typically what make up a good personal product. So we understand now why we built M, why it matters, and some of the underlying things that create these experiences. But you're a designer in this space, and there's all this stuff. Where do you start? Because you can be working on so many things. There's an AI component. As I mentioned, there's real people who are answering a lot of these questions at this point. You can work on the brand identity and how you set expectations in the thread with what you can and can't do. And it's pretty overwhelming. And in my process, it was important to understand all of these things and start to rank them in priority and figure out how I and the team could be more impactful. And so in doing this, I started to focus and identified the 4 pillars of M and the things that could drive our mission and our goals in the most meaningful and efficient way. And those 4 things were the client experience, which is typically like our iOS and Android app. It was the training and onboarding of the people who are so essential to the experience. It's the tool that they use, which helps us train AI and makes those people more efficient. And it was also partnerships and API integration, so we can start to bring more things into M. And now I could start to understand only these 4 things and really dive into them. And I identified that the training and onboarding of people was the most important thing that I could work on, which is pretty different for a designer to be spending time on. And so what I did was I spent weeks going through the training and onboarding that we were giving these people as if I were one of them. And I sat in these classes and listened to what we were teaching them. And they don't know what M is, and we have to explain and communicate our vision and what they're trying to do. And I would sit next to them while they were using this tool for the very first time. And I would listen to the questions that they had. And I would try and figure out what was working and what wasn't working. This was really meaningful and really impactful because it allowed us to better figure out what was going on. And the training of people is important because they ultimately lead to the experience that people have, and they're training our AI. So in doing this and identifying that this was the place that we had the most opportunity and could have the most impact, we set up a sprint with a few of us on the team, and we completely overhauled the process of training people and onboarding them onto this very complex project. And in doing that, we started to build better relationships, and I started to have better relationships with people on my team. And that led to more trust, and it led to us being able to lean into each other. And that ultimately meant building better products. So through this process of understand, identify, execute, now I can tie that back to my framing. And I don't just go to my team and say, here's what I think we should build, here's the mocks. I have a whole narrative around why these things matter and why they're important. We know why M is important, and we know why we're building it. We know the 4 things that help us get there in the most meaningful way, in the most efficient way, that drive our goals. And in understanding those 4 things, we can identify the one that we can have the most impact. And then we can share that work to the rest of the team and say, here's all this stuff, here's what we did, here's what we're learning, and here's that work and why we think it matters. And that was really, really important, and it led to a lot of things. And good framing started with a better process and building that narrative. And it led to better communication of why we were doing things. And it also led to better relationships and more trust on the team, and that leads to better products. And whether you know it or not, you use framing every single day. And it's a skill and a tool like any other. And if you're trying to learn a new skill or a new tool, I highly recommend that it be framing, because it will make you a better designer. And it will elevate the perception of what you do on your team. It will elevate the influence that you have, and it will elevate your work. So I'm happy to talk more about this over the course of the conference. Come find me. It was a pleasure talking to all of you. You can continue the conversation with me on Messenger or on Twitter. And thank you again to Drew and Matt for this opportunity.
Thank you, Jeremy. Does anybody have any questions for Jeremy?
I was wondering, I'm not sure what the size or composition of the teams are that you work on, but I was wondering if the ways you execute this framing technique change based on the scale of team that you're on.
Good question. I don't think it changes based on the skill or size of the team. I think that framing can apply and communication style can apply to pretty much anything you're doing and at any level that you're at. So no, I don't think it applies to the size or skill of the team.
I guess my question is, I work for a company that was a very small startup 6 years ago. Mm-hmm. We have problems with being a big design team now, and trying to translate a better process in that larger group from when we were just 2 people or 3 people. My question is more based on one of our co-founders is a design lead, and we pretty much follow the way we've always done it works. And as a team, we're recognizing now, as a group, we all have the same problems, and we're trying to institute process and framing and coming up with the why and the why are we doing this in our audience and tracking and whatever. And part of the hurdle is convincing the people who started the company, who are the decision makers, that this is important and this is valuable. So I guess my question is like, how do I frame that? You know, like how do I frame that to them? You know what I mean? Have you ever run that into that problem?
That's a really good question. I think that you convince them through your actions. And scaling a team is really hard, and you have to try new things and learn from them. I think that if you try new processes and they start to work, then you can leverage that success as why it matters and why it mattered. So I think, you know, trying stuff, and if you find success, then you can you know, frame it as this worked for us and this is why it matters.
Inception, man. Frame within a frame.
Yeah.
So actually, I don't know if you remember, but you won a company last time. Is that the thing that happened? Did you at all use these steps into that?
Man, that was a couple years ago. What Juana's referring to is that Drew held like a dribble competition for an email client, and yeah, I had the opportunity to work with Drew on building an email app. We just jammed, honestly. I didn't know a lot about process and framing the way I do now at that time. So I was often just like going into, you know, Sketch or Photoshop and building stuff. And there might have been a process there of framing, but it wasn't conscious. And it wasn't something that I was thinking about and was intentional about. And being mindful of things is really important, and I think leads to better process and product. Yeah. So if I did it over again, I think it would be very different. Very different.
So did you learn some of these techniques just from trial and error, or did it come from, are there other resources you read that kind of helped you frame how to frame?
100%. One is surrounding yourself by really good people and having an open mind and learning from them. I have some really good friends who also kind of practice this and talk a lot about it. And there is a book that I've read that talks more about this subject, and would be happy to recommend it to people, you know, offline.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy.
Cool. Thank you, guys.